Welcome to the Av Podcast with Cal C on South Shore Ave Radio.
Welcome to the Av Podcast, where I'm joined by a special guest, the producer of NPR's Invisibilia, Andrew Mambo. How you doing today, Mambo?
Hey, what's good, man? I'm good, man.
Nah, man. Thank you for coming back on. I want to try to keep this on the much shorter side today, like a mini pod, but we got to talk about
even a mini pod would be more than the conversation has been around this topic.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this whole Dana White situation, how is this happening? Like, for people that don't know, the owner and the face and the leadership of the UFC, Dana White, on New Year's Eve in Mexico, slapped his wife on camera, and it barely made news, and even if it made news, it's barely staying in the news. And I know on the sports side of things, Buffalo Bills cornerback Devin Hamlin's situation where his heart stopped during the game helped knock that off the news cycle. So I understand that part of it, where that part of it gets saved, but I wish I could remember the comedian's name who posted this on Twitter. And I think he's a Toronto comedian too. I remember he posted on Twitter that Dana White's slap so far doesn't come close to getting the same coverage or same treatment when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock.
Yeah.
Right? But like we live in an era where someone clearly at the top of his profession can do that and essentially be cancel proof. And not because Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, those are those are very difficult things to compare, right? I mean, one happened live during the Oscar ceremony.
For sure.
Like an audience of 130 million people watched it live. The other's like a grainy video from New Year's Eve that was recorded from a distance, and they're definitely not comparable in that way. I think that outside of, and also the level of celebrity of those people, of Will Smith and Chris Rock,
which I get.
Dana White, and nobody even knows. I don't know his wife's name. Unfortunately, it's just he's famous, I guess, but is it really he's not? He's nowhere near the level of fame as either of those two. And then just the fact that I think so. There's two things. One, I think there's the sports media world,
right,
and then there's the general
media.
National media, local media, newsrooms. And I got to tell you, it's not, it's just a story that people don't know him. He's not well known outside those spaces. I mean, I think that in the sports world, it's more of a question to why it's been so quiet and not as covered but outside of that, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that a lot of news media outlets haven't taken it up, because he's just not a known commodity. People, you have to explain to people who Dana White is, and then you have to explain to them what the UFC is and what MMA is. A lot of people just don't really know, man. Which is surprising to us because we're in that space and all of our friends know and all this, but we're not representative of
the general. It's
overall.
It's not representative of the general media and general news cycle and that kind of stuff.
It's not a major sport in America in the same way that in certain circles you think it's the biggest thing in America, but it's not. It's one of the fastest growing sports.
Yeah, it's definitely not one of the top four, not yet. When I say top four,
not even close.
Yeah,
not even close. Yeah.
As somebody who's been in the media though, have you seen anything like this before in sports or just in general, in terms of something like this being videotaped? Case in point, a Ray Rice situation, right? That was on camera. That broke general news cycle. You know what I mean? Even though I know it's a more popular sport, but he wasn't a superstar in it. He was a star. We play fantasy football, we know about him, or we're fans of football, we know about him. But the general person didn't know about Ray Rice until that. My wife, for example, didn't know who Ray Rice was until that video came up, and that circulated all over the world.
I think it's even outside of him being, a star in the biggest sport in the United States, right? A star running back in the U.S.'s biggest sport, arguably.
Yeah.
and is already like why that blew up. But also like don't forget the brutality of what happened in that video,
Absolutely.
right? Like
Absolutely.
it's like that was something that people were legitimately shocked by the brutality of what happened.
Mhm.
And then the story of that really was about the cover up, right? Like that was the thing that floored people even more, was that the NFL had like seen this video and knew about this and still like they didn't really take action until it blew up.
Until it blew up, yeah.
The cover ups I find a lot of times in this kind of scenarios, it's like the cover up ends up being, at least in my news cycle, right, outside of sports, it's actually like the cover up that's a more interesting story, right? So like even right now, it's like if the interesting story from my perspective in the news cycle would be the fact that like it's not being talked about. Well, why is it not being talked about not that it's not being talked about in like mainstream news, but like is in ESPN, is there like conversations in any of those spaces where like the story is being suppressed in that area? That would be a very interesting story. But I gotta say, I'm not sure that, we got some boys who would disagree in some of the chats, like, who were like, this is all like being controlled. I think that the interesting thing about this, like the sad thing maybe is about this, is that like, it doesn't have to actually be planning and coordination of these kind of things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like you don't have to actually say out loud, like, and then a commentator doesn't need to say, Dana White has in the past, right, like restricted access to people who have been critical of the UFC outside of himself personally.
Mm-hmm.
He's cut people off for critiquing just the UFC as an organization.
Yeah, for sure. Almost ruined careers
So
in some cases.
Yeah, and they have full, complete control over access to all the athletes, all the venues. This is really like it's not a conglomerate of like a bunch of different owners of teams,
right,
that come together under a banner of an organization, and all the owners have an equal vote or whatever, and they decide as a group. UFC is just owned outright.
Yeah,
like it's just
it's like a commissioner in a sport that actually owns the sport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really exist. Like that doesn't exist in the same way in the other major sports.
Right.
So in terms of control, it's hard to say like, you could get banned from one stadium, but that's not going to ban you from all press conferences and all the stadiums in the NFL, for instance, right? One owner could have a grudge against you and ban you, but you'll still have access all over. Like it's not going to ruin your career. It's not necessarily going to ruin your career because you can still, do what you're doing. In the UFC, that's not the case. Like you can just, you're just going to report the UFC from what you watch on pay-per-view. Just like it's the level of control they have is amazing.
It's unprecedented.
Impressive.
But that's
and they exercise it, and they exercise it regularly.
Yeah. And that's what helps to me in terms of him being cancel proof in that sense, because it's not because the people or the public pressure has worked against him or somebody reprimanded him or some entity reprimanded him. It's because he says so. Because I want to pull this up because I don't know if you've seen or heard of the presser when he had the press conference. So I think to your point where, there is no cover up in the situation. They came out. He's come out and admitted it. He's even had to tell like his supporters to like stop supporting me on this issue because I'm at fault here. Like stop making excuses for me. Like I'm like he's taking full responsibilities in his verbal actions. But I kind of want to read what he's what he's saying. Basically, he's like, in terms of further punishment for his actions, I'm gonna just read it verbatim. This is courtesy of theathletic.com. But what should the repercussions be? I take 30 days off. How does that hurt me? Me leaving hurts the company, hurts my employees, hurts the fighters. It doesn't hurt me. I could have left in 2016. Do I need to reflect? I don't need to reflect. I've owned this. I'm telling you that I'm wrong. I've had plenty of conversations internally with Endeavor CEO Ari Emanuel, ESPN. Nobody's happy. Nobody's happy about this. Neither am I. But it happened, and I have to deal with it. What is my punishment? Here's my punishment. I've had to walk around for how long I live, 10.4 years or another 25 years, and this is how I'm labeled now. My other punishment, I'm sure a lot of people, whether media, fighters, friends, acquaintances who have respect for me, might not have respect for me now. There's a lot of things that I'm gonna have to deal with for the rest of my life that is way more of a punishment than what I take, a 30-day absence. That's not a punishment to me. The punishment is that I did it and now I have to deal with it. So to me, like, I don't know how it interprets to you, but when I hear that, it's like I'm guilty of this action. I'm taking responsibility for it. I'm going to have to deal with the public shame for it, but there's no point of punishing me. You know what I mean? Because to your point, like, he owns the sport. Like, that shit is crazy to me, Mambo. That shit is crazy to me. And I hate to refer to the word, well, I have to refer to the word privilege, but it's more than just the racial privilege of it, because I'm not even looking at it from that aspect at this point. I think it's like, one of my favorite shows, I'm pretty sure you watched it too, but one of my favorite shows is The Wire. And one of the money quotes from that is, follow the money, because when you do, you have no idea where the F is going to take you, right? And while people may think this situation is racial, I think the power and the money aspects of it are just as big in this case than anything. And we can get to the dynamics of how it's laid out in the sport in just a second. But for nobody to test him or drag him through the media, I don't know. I'm blown away by it.
Yeah, I mean, when you think there's definitely a racial component, right? I mean, like, when you think about who deserves a second chance and who doesn't, America's kind of consistently clear about who does and who doesn't. But I think in this case, it's like, there's definitely a business decision being made there, right? Like, he's made himself the clear person who is, like, singularly identified with the UFC, right? Name somebody else who's the front office of the UFC. And unless you're like an insider, you can't. Like, you could just name Dana White, and that's it. Like, he's the face of it.
He's the face of the sport.
He's constantly in the front of it. He is the UFC in a lot of ways. He's totally correct. Like, he is the UFC. Yeah. So if you're Endeavor, what do? You get rid of him to bring in who? To be like, who is he? Like, I don't even know who the number 2 is. I don't know how people are doing. Like,
we don't even know.
Do you take that risk? Why do you take that risk? You have shareholders. You're the head of Endeavor. You answer to people. And the people that you answer to are going to be okay with you getting hurt. It's just like, he's definitely created a system for himself where he can be beyond question. I think the thing that people are like, it's maybe not even like people would accept what he's done and said so far if it wasn't for the fact that he'd been so hardcore and unwavering about fighters. Oh, if you do this, you're out. Like, it's not even a question. Nobody gets a second chance. There's nothing. You hit a woman, you're out. Like, that was always his strain. I mean, there's clips of him saying that, right? Like, and I think it's a double standard that people are a bit upset. I really almost more upset with than anything. Like, he spent all this time talking about this thing, right? Because the UFC got this reputation. They had a few bad cases of, like, really horrific domestic, intimate partner violence that happened. And then he's taking this, like, hard stance. This is not tolerable. He's beyond reproach, obviously, because he's leading it. And the fighters, there's no acceptance of any, second chance for them. But then when it's him, it's like, well, I'm a little different. Like, people don't like that. People aren't feeling that.
Because, and again, like, this
part of it.
And this is a sport, remember, that turned Greg Hardy into an MMA fighter. And for those who don't know who Greg Hardy is, I won't even waste time to explain it. Just Google his name, and you'll see what comes up. Let's not even waste time to even get into that. But
yeah, it's true. There's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I'm not. None of it surprises me, and it's like, I think, like, he's not wrong. It's like, what do you punish him? I mean, I think the one punishment is money. You always hit people in the pockets. You can fine people. You can take away stock options. You can do. There's ways to find a way if you really do want to punish somebody. I don't know necessarily that, like, just kick them out is the way. Right. The way that they, like, it's different. For the rules are definitely going to be different for him. I can see that. and they have a reputation of, even with the fighters, like they take a hard stance. They're like, I think that, like, I think they're almost as bad or worse than like WWE in terms of the stances they take with the fighters. Like, they don't want any of them to have power.
Oh yeah.
Right? Look at Francis. Like, they've been negotiating with Francis for an entire year. They can't come to terms. I doubt that Francis. I don't even know what he was asking for. I haven't looked into it in depth. But like,
Well, they
the
let
fact
him
that they
walk.
couldn't come to agreement is like, yeah, they let him walk. They're like, they're champ, huge name that got big name recognition, and they're just like, you can go. Like, that's how much they're willing to, like, it's more important. The money they can make with Francis is not as important as like showing that nobody is more powerful than what they are willing to give you. It's a tough organization, man. And in that, they, you know, then you also have this built-in safety net for himself of like, he is so powerful in the sport that's growing, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
Like,
don't know.
you know, and to your point, like, again, where you have, what's the word? Like, you basically have all these fighters that you're championing, like a defender of domestic violence and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, the fact that he's telling you that he can't be punished tells you how far, like, the fighters, in terms of not having a union and, you know, all of those things kicking in, it tells you how much farther they have to go, because I just don't know how you walk away unscathed from it. You know, and as far as, I mean, we're not even getting to like the ladies of the sport, the female fighters. Like, what about the female fighters? Like, as far as the female fighters, Andrew, like, I can't even begin to know what they're thinking right now. But what a weird place to be, to know your boss is saying all the right things, but we're just going to keep this train moving. What happens now if one of his fighters do this in the future? Because it may happen again, right? How do they get severely punished? Like, isn't that a major contradiction? You know what I mean? Like, if that, like, how does that stay the same?
Like,
after
do
this?
as I say, not as I do. Yeah, do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
Completely, absolutely. And I don't have an answer for you, man. But he's not gonna have a leg to stand on to really like punish somebody, but he'll do it anyways, right?
Right.
He'll do whatever he wants, because if it's a fighter, if it's a fighter that, oh, they've got some contract issues with, they're looking to get rid of this person anyways, they're out of the league. No
Right.
tolerance. Oh, somebody that they still want to work with. All right, let's renegotiate a contract, and then maybe we'll give you 30 days. You know, like, it's not going to change. It's a business, and they're going to keep making business decisions. So many of these things, though, like, you know, the leagues and whatnot, like, ultimately people think that, you know, oh, they take a stance, they're about equity, they're about this, they're about that. But in the rubber hits the road, okay, when it really gets difficult and complicated, you know, these things are flexible. Suddenly morals are not the same. They're flexible. There's wiggle room.
Right.
It's a business. They got to make money. Everybody, you know, it's like, to be surprised, nobody should be surprised by, you know, like, nobody should be surprised by that.
And you're right, but yet I still find myself surprised just because of the fact that, like, it's just getting no news traction. Like, honestly, hearing the negotiations with Francis and hearing that, you know, the deal with John Jones has worked out where they're getting a 10-fight deal. I've heard more about that than the actual slap at this point. You know what I mean? And to me, and I mean, it's only been a month, not even a month. And to me, that's where I'm kind of like, why am I hearing more about John Jones than I'm hearing about this? You know what I mean?
Because, like, who cares about the John Jones fight? Who cares about Francis? Who cares about the Dana slap? I mean, people who cover UFC.
Right.
Those are people that care. Like, honestly, outside of it, what do you care? People would be like, John Jones, who's that? You know, like,
yeah,
it's people in that space. Now, if you have a league where you control everything, you control all the access. Calvin, you are a reporter. You cover MMA. Do you throw your career away for this and then go either report on a different league because you know you'll basically be done with the UFC, or do you, like, what do you do? Legitimately, I'm asking you.
You know
what?
what? I don't know. That's the tough part. You like, it's hard to say, but it's like,
it's wild, right?
It's a sobering morality position to be in, because, like, what do you do in that situation? Do you literally cut your nose and your ears off to spite your face and spite your head? Because
Some
Yeah,
people will.
yeah,
Lots of people will, and lots of people will just be like, well, he's taking accountability. What am I trying to prove here?
right.
You know?
And it's true. But like my thing is, for some people they have to go and work a different sport. They got to now get, as a reporter, now you have to go and work on new leads and new contacts, and you know what I mean? Like say like you've been invested in this sport for 10 years, you're just working this game. Now you got to go work football. You don't know coaches, managers, all that stuff comes into play. So it's like a whole. It's almost like you're starting over. At least that's what my thinking.
Yeah, it's not like they didn't question him. They questioned him. Like you read that he's not the answers in the press conference he did. Like he's responding. The answer that you read out, that's a response to a question.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking him what should the punishment be?
Yeah.
You did this thing. What should your punishment be? And then his response is like, well, what do you think my punishment should be? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like nobody's asking him, but how much are you going to push?
But
How long are you going to push against him?
But
do you think? I mean, legit, like at some point you can ask him once, you can ask him twice. I'm sure by the third time he's going to be like, he's going to go backstage and be like, cut Calvin's credentials. I don't want to see him here again.
yeah, and then that's it.
Because it's his. Literally, the sport takes place in his house, so it's his house, his rules. And then outside of that house, honestly, like the interest is minimal because there are way bigger stories that happen on a regular basis every day. So what's the more interesting story from somebody in my space that's like outside of it is actually the more interesting story is like how does something like that happen with no accountability? Like what is there? Are there conversations? What do those conversations look like? The unspoken, the spoken ones. Like he doesn't have to tell Stephen A. what like anybody at that level. Like they know how far they can push, and you don't get to that level and not understand how the game is played or whatever. However, they're like and I think like with most leagues, you can do deep, heavy reporting. And ESPN does, and all these outlets, they do that. They do like deep investigative reporting, 60 between the lines. Like they do great stuff on all kinds of leagues, all kinds of sports.
But then how do they do that when they're in business with them?
Because all those other sports are not structured the same way as the UFC is.
No, but
and I'm just guessing here. So like
right, but I'm saying in ESPN's case, how do you go do a deep dive and do it outside the lines and do like a documentary style reporting and investigative reporting on him when you're actually doing business and paying him like $1 billion to showcase his fights? How does that work?
But they do it all the time. But they do it all the time with like college sports. They do it with like NFL. They'll do it with like NBA.
Right.
They do it with all these other leagues that they have rights, but they then have to like a lot of those entities are disentangled at ESPN. I mean, they're tangled in the background maybe, but like there's it's like one group is negotiating these licenses, and then another group is doing investigative journalism. And ideally, they're not talking together, they're not coordinated in any way, shape, or form. They're separate, right? But with the UFC, they grant the access. It's not even like I don't even know what that looks like. I honestly don't even know what it looks like to do hard-nosed reporting on a place that I'm trying to come up with an analogy, right? It's like your show. Like I have a contract with South Shore Ave, and I come on regularly and this and that. This is your show, Calvin. You own it. You have all this stuff, and I come on. I talk to you, and then I'm like, you know what? Calvin did this thing, and I really want to do some deep dive reporting on it, and I want to air that on the South Shore Ave. Like, no. Like you'll be like, get out of here. Like you won't. But you get lost, and he has the power to do that. And most sports don't have that.
Don't have the power.
Luckily, yeah. No.
So
because
let me ask you a question. Let me ask you. Sorry, not to cut you off, but let me ask you a question. Like because of the layout and the power structure that he has, and the uniqueness that he has in the sport, and the way the sport is kind of structured. Do you think that this situation is a one-off, or could this be a start of a trend? And what I mean, and I don't mean the start of a trend of like fighters and stuff following his domestic violence path, but I mean in terms of like, like an entity being powerful enough to tell you straight out, I'm beyond punishable. Like, do you think that's going to be the trend? Because I mean, you know what happens in other industries, but I'm just saying, like, to publicly do that. You know what I mean? After a public mistake or that for something that gets out publicly, do you think that's going to be the start of a trend where people are basically like in those positions that are like, yeah, you can't do nothing about it? Do you think that's going to be more of a trend?
But hasn't that already been like a trend that's been happening? I mean, you're seeing it happens in politics.
Yeah.
It's happening in a lot of the spaces now, man. People are just like, all right, I did it. What? You know, it's like
George Santos, right?
Isn't
that kind of like
and then suddenly people are like, oh yeah, I guess okay. Wait, you're not going to step down? People are like, no, I'm not stepping down. People are like, huh, that's weird. People used to step down when we would call them out. You know, like this is strange. I don't know where to start. Trump maybe is like one of the first times people realize you're like, wait, you can do all those things, and then you don't have to step down. You're like, oh, this is new. I like it. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's definitely. I don't think it's not a trend. I think like if you have the ability,
you're gonna do
step down. People are now starting. Yeah, look at go back to Al Franken. Al Franken had like an accusation. Not questioning the validity of the accusations. I'm just like making a comparison and saying like,
right.
Is one case where like he stepped down within like I'm trying to remember, but like it was relatively quickly. He stepped down, maybe a few weeks, and people were like, "Oh, we think Al Franken should step down as senator of Minnesota because it was like accusations that something he had done like 20 years earlier,
right?"
And like not to make it any less valid, it's like. I don't recall the exact accusations, but I know it was, they were serious enough that people were calling for him to step down, and he was just like, "Oh, okay, like I guess I'm supposed to step down," and he just did it. But like now you're looking back, and people are like, "Oh wait, he could have just been like, nah," like, which is a thing now. People are calling on George Santos to step down, and he's like, "I don't think I'm gonna do that." And you know what's crazy is like, could he win again? Maybe.
Probably could.
Well, look at like politics is like so. Like, what are the repercussions aren't always there for people, So why step down? I don't know.
Well, I
think it's part of a trend that's already been happening versus like I don't think it's going to get less. To answer your original question.
Yeah, I think it's going to continue and probably be bigger in terms of that aspect of it. Because to your point, like I think Trump was like the main or one of the biggest examples of the calamity of mistakes that he's made. And I mean, shit, he almost won again. He almost ran a second term. Like he came that close to running.
Did all that and then he got the most votes ever that a Republican presidential candidate has ever received.
Right.
After
everything that was done.
After his entire tenure, yeah.
So you're putting the battery in the back of more people to just be just outright like, yeah, I've made these mistakes and yeah, you're not going to cancel me. And we're just going to go on and be okay with that.
What do you think they should do? Like you're the head of Endeavor. What would you do?
It's a tough call because the way it's set up, I don't know. I don't know what you do in that situation. It's tough, but it's just crazy that the guy that basically is the face of the sport is basically telling you that I can't be canceled. You know what I'm saying?
By the way he said it in that meeting, he might have said it in the meeting with the head of Endeavor. It was like, yeah. What are you going to do?
Yeah, and he's probably like, you know what, you're right. What are you going to do? I mean, they could even play it off. They could have easily just for, I guess, to massage the minds of people if they wanted to do it that way. They could have said, hey, we're going to make him take a 30-day sabbatical or that kind of thing while he's still running stuff behind the scenes. He's just not out there publicly.
That's what's weird. It's like, just suspend the man for a month or two. Like they don't even try to like do some pretend. It's very strange. I don't even know why he would even fight that idea and notion of being suspended for 60 days or something like, or 90, even 90. Like, what does it matter? I don't know. It's very interesting. It's not even something. There's nothing even symbolic. It is very strange.
And then here's the whole thing of art imitating life. I don't know if you know about this, and this is probably the worst possible timing given the situation, but he recently purchased a slap league. like Power Slap. You know those,
Oh,
those
yeah,
slapping
yeah.
competitions?
Yeah,
Like he
yeah,
just recently
yeah.
purchased it, and they debuted it. They had to debut it a week after because of the whole situation that was happening because the video got leaked with him slapping his wife. And that show's on TBS now. And according to Showbuzz Daily, it debuted at the 45th spot on top out of the top 50 cable shows on a Wednesday on January 18th. So it got low ratings. Some of that could be due to the situation of this. I think, me personally, are people going to watch a slap league every Wednesday? Who knows? It could be trending. I don't know. I don't follow slap leagues to that extent. But like, to me, the whole art of imitating life thing is unreal. That this is happening. He's the face of UFC. He buys a slap league, and like nothing is. You know what I'm saying? Like the train is just moving still. Like I don't know what the length of the slap league is gonna be like, which is called Power Slap.
Really?
But like the fact that like he bought a slap league on top of this. Like really? You know, and it's like nobody's nibbling at these crumbs. Nobody.
Can't even make this stuff up. Yeah.
No, you really can't. You really can't. And I think it represents a melting pot of like, privilege, power, money, influence, indifference. You know, the way social media structures our lives now, where the attention span of like the next thing out, the next content out, the next videos out, like it just fast forwards everything out of your mind frame. You know what I mean? Like the Devin Hamlin thing was super sad in football. Anybody who watched that, in terms of him almost losing his life right there on the football field. I mean, now the playoffs are in full swing. We're not even talking about it. Right? Like it's already gone.
Yeah.
It's already gone from your subconscious. So I think all that plays a huge part. And I think why nothing, like you're not even really, nobody's even talking about this Dana White story.
I know. No, you're 100% right, man. It's wild. I do think that, like, if anything is going to come out in more mainstream media, it's going to be about the, like, quietness of it all versus, like, the actual action. I mean, obviously the action is a huge part of that, but then it's going to be a question of, like, how does that? I think that's the next story that can come out is, like, how did this happen, and how does this happen and nothing, like, there's no repercussions, there's no real true pushing coverage that's like pushing for something to happen. It's like a few conversations about it, some articles about it, press conferences, and everybody's just supposed to move on, you know? And again, I got to go back to, like, the one thing is, if he does that press conference and owns up to it and all this kind of stuff, and didn't have the history of talking about a zero tolerance policy, and then having zero tolerance, so I was like, I do think it's a different conversation. I think a huge part of the conversation is the different set of rules, like, and the blatantness of that is a huge part of why there is an ask for more to happen. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to reimagine, but if he's not that person, he's not calling for that. He's saying, you know, it's a shame, and people will be suspended, or we'll deal with each case as they happen, and we'll figure a way to, like, you know, we don't want this to happen, and we will work on it, and we will endeavor to do our best, blah blah blah. And then it happens. I do think that him owning up to it has a lot more power to it, and means a lot more. It means a lot less when he walks around saying there's zero tolerance, with one exception, me. It's kind of it's a little bit blatant in his face.
Well, the last thing I'll ask, I guess, is this, in terms of when he makes his statement, essentially living with the shame is worse than any punishment you can give him. When you hear that, what does that say to you?
I mean, come on. Come on. That's okay. I mean, what do you want to say? That's the worst punishment. The shame I feel. You guys just judge me. It's really hard. I don't know. I don't think that's the worst punishment they could possibly happen to him. I don't know what to say to that question, because it's like, no. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I
I don't
mean,
know.
like,
It's like
it's
it's very
hilarious.
convenient that is. It's very convenient that is the worst punishment that you could envision happening.
Yeah, word of mouth, and public opinion is basically worse than any punishment you can give me. Like,
Yeah, but also like don't talk about it anymore. Like
right.
the worst punishment I could have is like carrying this badge of shame with me. But let's like stop talking about it. Don't ask me about it anymore. It's like, okay, but isn't that part of the shame? Should we maybe just ask you about this incident every time you do a press conference? Would that be the worst punishment to you? Like you have to answer questions about it, but where you stand in your rehabilitation process every interview. Maybe that's like this is like. Anyways, I wouldn't let my 2-year-old decide what her punishment should be. So I don't think it's like.
Exactly. Can you imagine back when we were kids, we can decide whether we got the belt or not? You know, if that was the thing
I
back
think
then.
I feel really bad. Yeah, Dad, I feel really bad. I think the shame of where I'm personally at right now with the situation that happened is bad enough.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah,
no problem.
You know what? And just to show my responsibility, I'm not going to eat nerds on the weekends anymore. And I'm only going to bike ride on Sundays for the next 2 weeks. Just to show my responsibility. Okay, sure, no problem. There's no way that would happen, obviously.
Yeah, first off, you've already outlined way more punishment and more responsibility taken that outlined in these press conferences, my friend. So you're forgetting that the punishment is no punishment. It's shame. Yeah.
Like when he says that to me, like the public opinion shame and the opinions of his friends and family is going to be worse than anything you can give him. Like I think it's obviously we think it's hilarious, but like I don't even think you're going to hear about this punishment by summertime. You're not even hearing about it now. I mean, the case in point of this podcast, right? Like I'm betting you by summertime we don't even hear about this at all, which I think speaks to the power that he wields. But how people view the sport as well. To your point, like, you know, because it's not one of the four major sports in America, you know, especially in America, like the United States, college football is bigger, is way bigger than the UFC, right? And it's not on the worldwide level. It's not soccer. It's not Formula One. Like people still view it in that boxing way where it's like because there's so much violence and inherent violence to it, you know, inherited violence to it, like it has that, you know, anything can happen vibe to it, even though it's pretty polished. So like an incident happening like that has way less effect than if Adam Silver, you know, the commissioner of the NBA, does the same thing to his spouse.
Yeah.
Which I think says a lot about the structure of the sport itself. You know, and then does this trickle down, you know, to the future of like maybe fighters eventually getting some sort of a union because they're getting punished in a situation by somebody who did the same thing and didn't get, you know, any type of retribution for it.
Yeah, it's true, man. It's we should you got your follow up, you know, see where it's at in like a few months and see if anything in the narrative changes. It might, man. It might. The fact that like the lack of awareness might actually trickle up.
Now,
I mean, you know,
yeah. Well, we'll see. I'm thinking probably no, and I'm thinking probably not, and you know that's the end of it. Honestly, the only thing I think that would make it like the only way this story blows up more is if he actually has more of this in his past, and now it comes to light. Outside of that, I don't see that happening. Where it's like in a position.
Yeah, that could change the.
Yeah, like that would change the dynamics of it. Where it's like now like you know the company that's with him is forced to now make a decision. Like you got to hand these keys over now, at least for a while, because this is gonna kill our sport. You know, but like if he doesn't, you know, that was a one situation. Then it's like, and he's dismissing it. You know, his partners seem to be. Whether, I mean, they may not be okay with it, but like, again, this train's not going to move itself, you know, then it's kind of like you're shrugging your shoulders, but it just shows just like, wow. Like, you know, I hate to ask this, but can you imagine if he was black?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things that would he have, yeah, I mean, very different. This is an extremely different conversation if he's black, for sure. I don't even think there's a question there. Well, that goes back to what I was saying. I'll say it goes back to what I'm saying before, which is like this idea of like second chances and who deserves a second chance, and like who is the people that could actually even hold him accountable? Well, it's other white men, and other white men are like, oh man, you know, I get you, you know, like they connect with him, they can relate to him in a way that maybe they wouldn't be able to do if he was a black man in the same way, right? And maybe not feel as much like redemptive quality in him or something. And I'm sure some of those guys, like some of those executives who have the power to maybe hold him accountable, are themselves. You know, one is obviously there's a business decision, and on the other end of like, I get it. Like I could change, he can change. You know, he's going to learn from this. He's going to grow from this. It's why, you know, somebody like young white teenagers might get a second chance. A police officer's going to let them off on something. You know, a head of school that's going to look the other way and be like, it's okay. He's going to learn from this. He's going to grow from this. And then a black kid does it, and it's a completely different response.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, yeah. I can imagine a world where he's black and this would be a completely different conversation, for sure.
Yeah.
Because we live that shit. So, yeah, I can imagine that.
100%. Dana White gets a second chance. Devontae White, it works out a little different.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're like, I thought he was such a nice guy, but, you know, I really didn't know him. Whereas Dana, it's like, oh, well, I know him because I am him. So, you know.
It definitely bears watching to see what happens in the next little while. But like I said, again, I think nothing, because nothing's happening now and it's fresh. So when it gets old, it's and the way the news cycle works nowadays, especially on your phone, that is getting super cycled out of your phone. You know what I mean? Out of your memory by the time, like I said, March break comes.
In many ways it already has. Yeah.
Which is scary.
You're right.
Yeah, which is scary. But, you know, we'll cut it here for now. But you know, thank you for hopping on this pod and just, you know, sharing your thoughts on this.
Hey, we'll see. We'll check back in a little while.
Yeah,
I think I got to agree with you. Unless there's a change to the story, I do also doubt that much will come of it. Yeah, unfortunately.
And if there is, then definitely, you know, we'll hop back on this one, because we would have to talk about if this escalates further.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm down.
Thank you for checking the Av Podcast. And all thank yous go to Andrew Mambo for hopping on the pod for this Dana White conversation. I know I shouldn't be amazed by it still, but I can't help it, man. I am. I'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, actually. My Niners are a game away, so, you know, I got to share a couple words about it. And next week, we're going to be breaking down the Best Man series. So if you're a fan of the movies and now the 8-part series, look out for me next Friday. Thank you, and make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Hit that like button. Click on all of the stars for me, please, and thank you. And check out my website over at SouthShoreAv.com. All right? For Andrew Bumble, this is Cal C. And you just tuned into the latest episode of the Av Podcast right here on South Shore Av Radio. All right, until tomorrow, we're out. Peace.